Okay, hi Jenna, great to see you again. So we're going to have a little bit of a conversation today, and we're going to be talking about kind of risk and safety management today, aren't we?
Yes, we've already had a pre-recorded discussion, and it's quite interesting because we might be coming from two very different places.
Uh,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
so and I think that's the case, isn't it? Because actually, where I'm coming from a very therapeutic kind of psychotherapeutic kind of space, actually, elements of risk and immediate kind of crisis management can be very different than kind of your past experiences. So do you just want to say a little bit about your past experiences?
yeah, I think that so it's I'm very aware of this because obviously today I practice as a therapist, but I do take crisis point cases.
Mm.
And historically, I worked in domestic abuse. So, like those first initial points of contact with survivors of abuse was to capture the risk and then to promote safety, instantly so that we could. The landscape of domestic abuse is that sometimes we've got like a homicide timeline with total
Hmm.
wipeout as the most extreme set of circumstances. That is when a person leaves the relationship, the risk is so elevated. So, as
Yeah.
professionals, we need to catch that very intensely. And then we have to put in the right sorts of agents in and around risk management immediately so that because we have to exercise professional duty of care. So,
Yeah.
one of my roles, and then when I was working in human trafficking, the first thing to come in was a safety plan for the victims because of Stockholm syndrome. Quite often, they would go back to the abuser, the trafficker. So the first pieces of work were safety plan, risk, minimizing risk, and Section 47. So they were removed with immediate effect into foster placements, etc., for promotion of safety. So I have this in the background as a
Mm.
therapist. And yours is so you say your professional frame of reference is quite different.
Absolutely, because a lot of the kind of the work that's going on and a lot of the work that I've done in the past and kind of do now is all often about kind of past experiences. So it's processing
Mhm.
past experiences, so they're often not as live.
Yeah.
So I do have done a little bit of kind of work with kind of live kind of immediate kind of situations. And I think when we're talking about kind of risk, we're often talking about kind of risk of suicide, kind of self-harm
Mhm.
that could potentially kind of lead into suicide as well. Um, but and I know you do a lot of kind of supervisory work around domestic abuse,
Yeah.
and that often can be quite live and kind of ongoing and happening in the moment, can't it? I know
Yeah.
some clients that I've supported in the past have been in situations where they've been in unhealthy relationships, which are quite risk relationships, and have also got to the point of leaving. And as you say, that is the highest risk point, isn't it? When a person is leaving that relationship.
Yeah, because it almost increases the risk by double because we have the survivor of the abuse taking back control, which means the perpetrator is losing control. So this is
Mm.
like the most vulnerable time that we have. And I think I love what you said because I think that really captures our difference is that I think that when you're a therapist, most of the time it's working with past risk, but how that would probably interrupt a person's space today, like suicidal ideation. And I think that still today, for me as a therapist, maybe a difference is that I'm still working with live risk. So
Hmm.
someone's attempted suicide, I'll be contacted and I'll go in straight away. And part of that assessment for me is if it's domestic abuse, is okay, we need to profile the abuse and we need to keep you safe. And we need to follow a protocol around that because it's very live and very entangled in the here and now,
Yeah.
rather than it being so much historical.
Well, and I think also as well, the difference, just kind of thinking about you talking there, is about the environment,
Yeah.
and actually
Mhm.
the risk and what we're trying to kind of manage, whether the risk is kind of there with the client or for the client.
Hmm.
and how much the environment, the space that they're in is having an impact on that. So if we think about kind of the SOS model kind of around kind of self, other, and situation, kind of what's going on for the client, what's going on within the situation, what's going on within the other within that, and what effectively we can have an influence on or support with.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because I think that in that space, it's like looking at how stabilized someone is, maybe,
Mm.
are they stable? Where are the protective factors in their world? Because it doesn't, I think there's such a difference, isn't there? And I think this really puts a spotlight on my work as a therapist in that lots of people are stabilized by the time they come to therapy, and
Mm.
they're looking at something a bit differently, but then because of my work, I think in with looked after children, I'm always, I feel like in a fire zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in like and that is a very different space for me to be in because I have to do these protocols to keep a person safe, like immediately. So I and professionally cover my own back in that as well because it's such a
Yeah.
vulnerable piece of work.
Absolutely. And I think it's really difficult to kind of manage that risk. So what other protocols that you go through? What other protocols that kind of you often bring in?
So domestic abuse, because of our clinically supervised stop domestic abuse teams, so it's quite similar to them. So the protocol is if we've got a person, and I quite often get a lot of domestic abuse cases because of my
Mm.
work and background. If someone comes to me and they are in the relationship and they are very entangled in the abuse still, gently. We can't always come in really hard, but again, depending
Hmm.
on the situation, because I just shared with you before we had this conversation, I've got such a high risk case at the moment where the life
Hmm.
is on the line. We have someone's life on the line. That's where it's escalated to. So it's really managing this in the way that domestic abuse has to be managed is it has to be screened, and that is by ways of a dash risk assessment
Hmm. Yep.
and the appropriate referring agent and appropriate referral pathway to safeguard the situation of like elevated domestic abuse where someone is very much in the relationship and there's physical abuse, there's psychological harm, is they're asked a series of questions, and if they score 13 or more, then they're in the domains of high risk, which means ultimately and automatically it has to go to something called MARIC, which is a
Yep.
multi-agency assessment conference, and other agents have to come in to safeguard and to manage risk, and that's the protocol for like let's say high risk domestic abuse cases.
Yeah, so that's a multi-agency kind of approach at that
Mhm.
point, isn't it? Where kind of
Yes.
the police and kind of domestic abuse services and kind of other teams will come in and support
Mhm.
around that. And I'm imagining kind of social services if that's kind of
Yes,
appropriate as well and needed.
definitely. And I think that when I clinically supervise this space, because of total wipeout and like a homicide timeline, we that particular service has an in-house hospital provision where they take cases
Hmm.
that have hit that level and they come in and they just safeguard and put all of these protective layers in whilst we start the process of psychological education. Because the really big issue we've got is people normalize abuse. So their
Yeah.
interpretation of what is risk sometimes is so different to what a normal person's assessment of that risk is. So we've got a very long process of untanglement to say, no, this is abuse. This is really risky. And that bit's separate 'cause it takes a long time to do that.
Yeah, and actually, what also we're coming in from there at a point is making a judgment ourselves and bringing in kind of
Mm.
elements of our judgments that we're making around things, as opposed to more following the client with that perspective. Because you say around actually that skewed kind of process, if they've been in domestic abuse relationships for a long period of time, actually their sense of kind of what a normal kind of relationship might be will be very filtered.
And doesn't that like this throws up like so many different questions between like the spaces of therapy and obviously like domestic abuse is ultimately we're working with what a person's perception is, and that perception could be so dangerous for them.
Hmm.
So the assessment stages, they have to continuously be done because as we educate someone on psych ed,
Yeah.
this assessment of their own risk is going to be very, very different at different times in their
Mm.
journey. So it's just such an interesting thing because it really shows us how complex it is to manage.
Yeah, and actually that blended inness that kind of goes in throughout the whole of kind of the therapeutic process around kind of risk. So it's that constant reassessment, isn't it? It's that constant
Mhm.
kind of having it in the background, really informing all of the work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe having a really clear frame of reference in terms of how to work these cases so that we
Mm.
don't go in too heavy, and we don't frighten someone in the space. Like there's this kind of subtle, gentle approach that's
There's kind of
needed.
flow backwards and forwards, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that's quite hard to get that balance when you've got someone who maybe has attempted their life as a result of domestic abuse. You're having to gently come in and say, well, you can't go back yet because the risk is going to be through the roof. And we need to somehow softly manage that without frightening someone.
Mm. So just thinking kind of on a little bit of a tangent there, and you mentioned about kind of suicide and somebody kind of an attempt and actually thinking about it from maybe a different perspective of non-domestic abuse. So maybe clients that are feeling overwhelmed, that are feeling low, depressed, kind of anxious, kind of even kind of thinking about kind of from a PTSD, CPTSD perspective. Actually, there might not necessarily be kind of an abusive kind of partner, yet actually there is still quite, could be quite big risk.
Definitely, like, and there's a theme that I think is really interesting to look at is this. I think if we look at your work, my work, suicidal ideation is in all of the time. And then at
Yeah.
what point do we, for you, and you've just delivered your suicide awareness training, so
Hmm.
which has been great, but just
Thank you.
for you, Dale, when you have this come in, where do you put the crisis management plan in? Like, what does that look like for you in your work to help people, I think, have some resources on how to, what do I do in this space?
And yeah, and I suppose for me, when I think about it, I'm kind of doing an immediate kind of very, very simplistic kind of low, medium, high risk,
Yeah.
and really thinking about, okay, so where is this person coming in from? I'm thinking about different kind of areas. I'm thinking about their overall kind of mental health and well-being,
Hmm.
their past, and kind of using that to inform some of the risk assessment that's going on. And then kind of if we are in medium or kind of high risk, okay, what needs to happen kind of now? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it might be about just actually immediately supporting the person in that moment through kind of just grounding techniques, kind of giving them kind of immediate support and resources that they can do, maybe offering things that they've not even thought about before. It might be about putting a plan in place
Hmm.
alongside them to kind of think about, okay, when I get to this point, what can I do?
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. And I think I do something, well, I do something very similar. And again, for people out there that don't really know how to work this space, I think it really is based on the individual. And
Absolutely.
yeah, giving them that kind of for myself, when we've got suicidal ideation, it's actually very common for
Yeah.
survivors of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and PTSD because of the overwhelm of the symptoms. And it's always how to drive into a very different space so that we don't put the acceleration on the mental kind of, let's say, rumination of the ideation and
Yeah.
with the physical symptoms as well. And we don't get the accelerator going down on it to encourage risk. We give you something very quite different, which is where you can drive into these are the reasons why I want to live. This is who I can contact, call, and here are
Yeah.
all of my protective factors to assist me at crisis point.
Yeah. And I think it's that very much that, again, that soft kind of process within it. Actually, often we don't need to go in kind of hard. It's okay. Okay. We don't need to be phoning the GP now. We don't need to be phoning
Hmm.
kind of emergency services at this point. It's about kind of really being calm and relaxed within that kind of
Yes.
communication with the client because if we go in too big, often what will happen is they'll close down because it's not a good thing for them to be sharing. And actually, it is. The fact
Yeah,
that we're having these communications, validating their kind of experience, validating kind of what's going on for them is so, so important.
definitely. And I think making, when people have suffered and they sit in suffering for so long, I think that when we recognize professionally that this symptom that comes in, and we really open up the space for it to give someone permission to say, yeah, this bit does happen, and this is really important for us to capture for you to understand it, so that we look at it, acknowledge it, and then we find a way to give you tools around it so that you manage it and you take agency here in this
Yeah.
space for yourself.
And I love the way that you kind of say this symptom,
Hmm.
because I think it very much is, isn't it? It's a symptom, the kind of the suicidal ideation and the kind of the thoughts that can come in, the plans that come in, very much can be as a way of dealing and coping, or as a symptom of kind of other things that are kind of occurring, kind of what's going on. And unfortunately, that symptom itself can be incredibly scary and fearful for the client.
Yeah, definitely. And it's such a terrifying place to be in. I think
Mm,
it's so tragic as well that as humans, we travel into these places where we've suffered for so long. And I always think of coming outside of your window of tolerance in like disassociation, numbness, like the
mhm.
fallout of having been in such a heightened state is just like, oh, I'm done. But it doesn't always necessarily mean I don't want to be alive anymore. It can just really put emphasis on a person being so done with going through so much.
Yeah, I don't want to feel what I'm feeling anymore. Not
Yeah.
that I don't want to kind of be dead or not here.
Hmm. Hmm. Definitely, definitely. And I think that when we have these conversations and we really, like I say, open up the space, it just gives us the permission to take the agency and then the ownership over it. So I'll say to my clients, it's like we can climb out of the trench.
Yeah.
Yeah, we start to put these ladders and we come out of like the pit of despair, and we can start to just feel a bit separate from it and different when we have resources, we understand it, and we're processing it.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's a question that I've been asked before from supervisees at times is around kind of choice and about kind
Mhm.
of clients' choice, if that's kind of an avenue and a support that they want to kind of go down kind of as an option. It is always an option. And I think for me, there is something about choice and the ability to be able to choose. And I've said to clients before who have had quite high levels of kind of suicidal ideation and plans and intents at times to, yes, I can kind of totally 100% kind of appreciate and understand and kind of say wholeheartedly, it's kind of your choice. Does it feel like a choice at the moment? Because it might not do.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I will always say I absolutely 100% hope that's not a path that you take, and I will do everything within my power to kind of stop that from happening. But it is your choice. It's not my responsibility as to whether that's a path that happens, because
Mhm. Mhm.
it's not. And I
Yeah,
think as a
yeah,
therapist, that's really important to kind of understand and kind of go, actually, it's not my responsibility whether this person
yes,
lives or dies. It's your responsibility and duty of care to do everything within your power to
yes.
support them and stop them from kind of choosing that as a path.
And ultimately you might not be able to. And I think
Correct.
and I think that there is such a wise piece of advice for people managing maybe even like personal conflict in this space and trying to, because I quite often see it in supervision, like lots of people go into the third sector because they want to rescue and remedy and fix and repair, but that's not our job. Our job
No.
is to see, validate, and as you said, it's a person's autonomy. That is your choice.
Mm,
But I love what you said, it's I can do everything in my professional capabilities to give you these sorts of tools and ingredients for you not to step into that choice. But ultimately, it's not your responsibility. And I think people need to hear that because I think
mm,
professionally, people believe it is. And I have always been taught it's not if someone's going to do it, they're going to do it. You just need to act in the best. interest that you can, but ultimately you can't stop it.
Yeah. Well, I think actually there's an element you can't necessarily stop it, but you can do everything within your
Yeah.
power to kind of have different paths, different
Hmm.
avenues,
Hmm.
and show them as options. And I guess that's
Yes.
often the kind of the space that people can sometimes get, okay, this is the only path.
Yeah.
And actually there is many, many kind of different paths. And it's about then that gives choice. If it's only one path, there is no
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah. Yeah,
And actually what we're
definitely.
trying to do is offer choice.
Definitely. And I think professionally as well, again, like when we have these spaces in clinical supervision, the professional duty of care, and I think we have to make entries on our work to ensure that we have provided that space and we've given those pieces of information over to, I think protect ourselves because it's such a vulnerable space to work in. So it's always good to have such a clear frame of reference and how you're going to engage this space, but
Hmm.
also to professionally protect.
Yeah. And I think there's a line kind of when I'm thinking about kind of risk, and I'm thinking also about kind of capacity and
Hmm.
about clients' mental capacity. And actually, if they do move across that line from a space of almost potentially kind of psychosis and those types of things, that's when they do not have the capacity. And actually, that's absolutely kind of where we need to kind of 100% kind of step in. And I have in the past kind of received kind of messages and contact from people saying that this is the path that they're going to take. And at that point, as I say to all my clients, I will do everything within my power to stop it. And this is where emergency services have kind of been brought in, and I've had to
Yeah.
make those calls.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't change that, and I won't change that, but I still
Hmm.
hold that it is their, uh, it's an option for them and a path that they may choose to take, and it's their path.
Absolutely. I get you. And there's that piece, isn't there? There's that, those high risk cases where there is like a very proactive intention.
Yeah.
I think that when we, and having managed this over the last 6 months with someone that is very much in the mental health community team because of the capacity thing and
Yeah.
because of the risk, and the intention is definitely there. So proactive management from even a therapeutic space in this person I think is going to do it. There is a huge risk. I have consent to share this information. We need the support really elevated to help
Absolutely.
protect. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's really quite complex though, because I think there's so many different layers to it.
absolutely there is. And we could spend a whole day kind of talking about this,
Yeah,
couldn't we?
we
And I think
could.
it's
We
what you've
could.
mentioned is really important there to have that kind of that team around. And actually, if we are
Yeah.
working with somebody who is kind of high risk, then okay, what other support have they got in place? What other support can be put in place? What support do we have in place as a clinician? Kind of this is why supervision is so kind of important. It's about kind of, I offer to all of my supervisees, if there's anything urgent, kind of contact me in between sessions. It's really kind of
Mhm.
so kind of helpful to just have a space just to talk to somebody else in the profession. And we are quite limited who we can talk to as a
Yeah.
consequence of confidentiality.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think that again is the key thing, isn't it? Having a supervisor that is equipped with the knowledge and the
Mm,
expertise of being able to hold these spaces with you is absolutely paramount, because I think even for myself, and again, I know we had this conversation before you and I went on, with such intense cases, I would feel mad if I did not have these anchors of support to
mhm.
like bounce some of these situations off of, and then have an understanding and a difference of opinion sometimes in how this space absolutely needs to be managed so that again
Yeah,
I'm professionally safe and everything is in as it should be. So clinical supervision is our golden ticket, I think, working at crisis.
yeah. It's a really kind of challenging kind of area to work at, that kind of high risk kind of
Yeah,
area, isn't it, around
yeah,
kind of clients. And it's a case of, okay, the decisions as to where, when do we step in, and if we do step in, kind of what and how do we go about doing that? Um,
definitely, definitely. I think I've always, in the way I have these conversations with my client, is you will always remain at the heart of the whole process for me. But
Yeah.
safety is the most paramount, is so paramount in all of this, in all trauma work. So I need to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to implement that. But
Mm.
you're at the heart of everything.
Yeah, which is why I think the communication around it kind of is really important as well. And
Yeah.
sort of saying to clients, okay, this is what I'm feeling I'm needing to do. These are the reasons why. This is what I'm
Yes.
going to do. And also at times, actually, if the client doesn't agree with it, working with that, sort of saying, I know
Yeah.
this is not something that you might agree with, but
Yeah.
this is what needs to happen, and these are the reasons why.
Absolutely. And that's very similar to those really uncomfortable conversations that I've had to have over the years when children's services have had to come in and
Mm,
having this very transparent communication because the risk is so high and it's so big and there's such a threat of harm. And only then, and I think again, this is where maybe my space is a bit different because of my work over the years and where I'm linked up to. I'm in the fire pit quite a lot
yeah.
and the safety and especially safety of children is again paramount. So we have to inject all of these things so no one is hurt, if not worse, something very tragic happening to them.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it's different level, isn't it, from working with children and working with adults? Because where I
Yeah.
work with adults, kind of
Yeah.
almost exclusively, I'm not working with kind of children and young people. And actually, I would suggest that the bar where we step in is a lot lower when
Yes.
children, vulnerable adults are kind of involved, because
One,
the
yeah,
ability to choose is significantly kind of reduced.
absolutely. And, and there's where you professionally, I think it's the Every Child Matters piece of legislation, you
Mm,
do therapist or not, you have a professional duty of care
absolutely.
because under the age of 18, it is a very different space because you do need to step in with safeguarding
Yep.
agents to protect them. So, and make sure that you accurately record every point of admission in and around that. So you're doing everything you can to keep them alive.
Yeah, and I think that's also you've identified there that's quite important as well, just to keep your records and kind of notes once
Yeah.
things are kind of you've dealt with the immediate situation, you've got support, the support's in place to document down kind of okay, this is what happened, this is what I did, just so that you've got a record there of kind of the information that's kind of gone on, the decisions that have been made, why you've made those decisions at that point in time.
Absolutely. I think we've covered really good grounds to help people. Hopefully, I'm sure that we will in this space so that they have maybe an idea on how you and I work it when we've
Mm.
got these really complex layers of work in the room with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one thing I just wanted to kind of share, and I think it's something that you mentioned to me once about kind of a piece of work that you've done with a client, and you had to kind of step in, put safeguarding in place, kind of, and people were removed from the kind of the situation, and the young person that you were dealing with at that time kind of really wasn't very happy about the fact that that's something that you did, kind of the relationship kind of broke down. But I think I remember you saying that later on kind of a few years later, they came back and
Yes.
actually said to you, I now understand why you did what you did and am so thankful for doing that.
Yes, I use that case all the time.
Mm,
And it's one that always gets me because it was so, and I think it is really difficult to manage because he had been bitten all over his arms and I had to
mm,
safeguard him instantly. And he was so unhappy about it. And I think that I was in the really early days of my career. And when I look back at that point, I think that in those immediate moments of danger with children, you have to really step in, constantly and remind them of your
yeah.
position. And if there is a threat to harm to them, you're going to have to act to keep them safe. I didn't get that bit right there enough, and then he wouldn't speak to me. But I did get a letter. I think it was about maybe 8 years later, and it's from
Ah,
him as an adult. I've got two. I just found a letter. I've got several letters from him. He's very successful now, and he did understand later
yeah.
why I had to do that. I had to do it, but I could have done it a bit differently because I think I got a bit of that wrong.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. It's really good to kind of get that learning and reflection around
Mhm.
that. And actually it almost kind of says, okay, sometimes we have to do things that don't necessarily feel right. They're going to impact on the therapeutic relationship. It
Yes,
doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong thing to do.
perfect. Exactly. And we're always learning. And we don't
Absolutely.
always get it right, just like I've
Yeah.
shared. So, yeah, thank you.
Fabulous stuff. Well, I think that kind of covers a lot that we've talked about today. Thank you,
Hmm.
Jenna. That's really useful. And a bit of a plug, I'm doing kind of my suicide training again in 3rd of July. If anybody's interested, please do sign up to that.
Oh, yeah,
And then
you'll
we've got the
learn.
trauma training in
Hmm.
September as well, haven't we, that we're doing together online. So
Yeah.
we will get that out and advertised, and hopefully people can join us on there.
Any questions, DM me because we'll put this on like professional network. So, yes, hope to see as many people as possible and definitely attend Dale's training.
Yeah, and any kind of, I think the real kind of takeaway for me is if you have any kind of concerns, any worries, take it to supervision. Just
Yes,
have a conversation with somebody else about it. Don't just kind of hold on to it, and kind of even if there is this element of doubt, it's always best to kind of talk to somebody else about it and seek that second kind of opinion as much as possible.
absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Grand stuff. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you.